Welcome to the Pacific Research Institute's Next Round podcast. I'm Rowena Ichon, Senior Vice President, and with me is Tim Anaya, Senior Director of Communications.
Hi, Ro. Great to be back with everybody.
Well, Tim, you mentioned last week that we could actually get a deal on school reopenings between Newsom and the legislature any moment now. Well, it took a whole week. Politico reported that Newsom was going to hand out to schools that bring into the classroom kindergartners to second graders. He's going to give them $2 billion. Sounds like a bribe to me.
Well, we've been waiting for white smoke, and we officially have it. The governor and the legislative leaders announced the quote-unquote deal at a press conference this morning. You know, what's interesting is that I just wonder, is this actually going to reopen schools? When you hear, they always say the devil is in the details. Well, a lot of carrot and not a lot of stick.
And, Tim, don't the school districts ultimately have the decision, the school districts and the unions? So it's really up to them. And school districts just decide to shrug off the money and have other demands or continue their demands like 100% vaccination and all these ventilation improvements. And there's not much the state can do.
That's right. Well, I mean, the governor does have broad, emergency powers, as we've discussed on the blog before. It's certainly been litigated, the extent of them. But that's right. This bill doesn't require schools to reopen, but it's more about offering financial incentives. And it does say that districts that, are in the purple tier or any tier, if they don't reopen what they call transitional kindergarten, which is like preschool, through the second grade, and also bring back at-risk students, or basically students with varying disabilities, that they will start to lose a percentage of money for each day that they're closed starting April 1st. Well, that, normally money talks, especially with schools, but you're exactly right. It's really the local teachers unions that are driving the train here, and they want all sorts of things. They want all the vaccines. They want all this expensive ventilation. And as our Lance Azumi has written about, a lot of them are using COVID-19 to make unrelated demands on policy issues, things like charter schools and restricting school choice. So that's right. Until, at the end of the day, the legislature is dancing with the one that brung them. And the one that brung them, a lot of them, was the teachers union. The teachers unions are one of the biggest players in politics in California. Many Democratic legislators owe their careers to the teachers union spending heavily to get them elected in the first place. So while they might be pounding their chest and hearing the voices of their constituents who are very upset, Democrat districts, Republican districts alike, parents are very upset and very frustrated and want schools to reopen now. It just rings more like legislators are playing lip service more than they're actually taking a firm stand and forcing teachers unions and school districts to open up right away.
I've been looking at the calendar. This month, March 1st, marks the full year anniversary at PRI, where we all started working from home. I remember first San Francisco staff called me and said, we need to work from home. And then I remember a few days later, you emailed me and said, we've got to close down. And then a week later, I think Los Angeles had to start working from home. So this stimulus package now, I think it's the fourth stimulus package that we've had. And I really like your blog piece that's coming up this week on the various provisions and the money that's going to be handed out.
It's really interesting. For starters, many billions of dollars of the prior stimulus plans have not yet been spent. But here we are spending another $1.9 trillion. And really a lot of the debate over the stimulus plan is over things that are unrelated to stimulus. For example, you have had all this discussion over the $15 minimum wage, which has nothing to do with COVID. It's just high on the wish list of Bernie Sanders and AOC and all of the progressives. So a lot of the debate has been over policy issues that have nothing to do with COVID relief. For example, we've heard incessantly on television over the past week about the $15 minimum wage in the Senate parliamentarian, whether she would allow it in the bill or not. Well, the $15 minimum wage is one of the worst things we could do to help the economy recover from COVID. Their own Congressional Budget Office said that if we did that, we'd lose 1.4 million jobs in the country between now and 2025. So, I think a lot of people are wondering, is this bill really about COVID relief, or is it really about politics and satisfying the policy wish list of a new Senate majority that's just been given the keys to the car and is ready to take it out for a spin?
Well, my pet peeve on the bill is this $100 million going to BART, which would help extend the BART line all the way to San Jose. Now, the irony is that so many companies now are making the decision to allow workers to work from home. So yeah, I got to believe that by the time that extension gets built to San Jose, I think ridership will not be what they had originally thought it would be enough to actually build that extension on the track. So once again, government is going to be behind the times. What about some of your pet peeves?
Well, and to take off on that, it's one thing, and we know that transit agencies have been hit during COVID because there's a lot less ridership. If you're going to have funding for that, that would be one thing. This is a long, drawn out project that is going to cost billions of dollars and is already having cost overruns. So it really has nothing to do with COVID overall. My pet peeve goes to what we were saying a little earlier when we were talking about school reopenings. There's $130 billion in spending in this plan that goes for school reopenings, but only 5% of that money is going to be spent in the first fiscal year. Well, if there's an immediate need now, why is all this money going to be spent next year, the following year, and until 2028? So I think that's very short-sighted and really shows once again this is more about political favors and pet projects and the priorities of a new majority, much more than it is about immediate COVID relief.
So, our next podcast, this upcoming podcast, is with PRI Senior Fellow Wayne Winegarden on his latest study. And it's part of our entrepreneurship series on the gig economy. Listeners know, I'm sure, that the gig economy workers and companies have been under fire, and especially in California. The unions have been trying to dismantle this really growing part of our economy by trying to claim that these workers are actually being exploited. But the fact is, gig workers love their current arrangement.
Well, and it's so important for COVID relief. I mean, gig work was a lifeline for so many people who lost their jobs and needed a way to provide for their families while stuck at home. So, we're seeing in Washington this bill called the PRO Act, which is a national version of AB5 that Democrats have introduced in Congress. And then the Biden administration, which is very pro-labor union, just appointed the chief enforcer of AB5, Julie Su, to be the Deputy Secretary of Labor. So Wayne's study really goes into the importance of the gig economy, explores all these issues, these policy mistakes that so many in California and now in other states and at the federal level seem to be making. And he talks about ways that we should reform the law so that we can have this really future of work that's taking hold right before our eyes, so more people can be their own boss, become a small business owner, become an entrepreneur, work from home, work for themselves, work at their own schedule that works for their family's needs. So a lot of really important issues with this study, and I think you'll all find Wayne's discussion of it very interesting.
And what's also great is I'm hearing that there's a lot of media interest in this study. It's tough to, as a think tank, it's tough to get the media to pay attention to scholarly work, but the media is really loving this.
Yeah, I've been, you never know when you're in the think tank world what folks are going to find interesting and what they aren't. But I've been very pleased with all the state and national print and radio and television coverage that we've received. So I hope you all stay tuned and learn what all the buzz is about.
So thank you all for listening and hope you enjoy it. Welcome back to PRI's Next Round podcast, Wayne.
Oh, thanks. It's always great to be here.
So to start with, perhaps we should give a definition for our listeners who may not be familiar with the subject of your study. We hear the terms gig jobs and gig economy tossed around quite a bit these days. What kinds of jobs are we referring to when we talk about the gig economy, and how Californians interact with gig economy customers?
It's really funny, because I know the first time I actually heard the term gig economy, my first thought was we're talking about gigabytes, right? We're talking about technology. When you're talking about the gig economy, the gig refers to actually working a gig, right? Gigs. And so what you actually have is something that's very traditional, right? Where people are coming together to do short-term, like freelancing. It's something that's existed, for many, many years. The difference is that the gig economy, they are able to leverage technology platforms. So now people can perform gigs, whether it's a part-time or even a full-time basis, across lots of different jobs, right? You can do shift work, advertising, web designing, professional services. And of course, I think something most people are interacting with, driving for Uber and Lyft. So there's this wide array of jobs and gigs that we can now do because the gig economy creates platforms that lets people come together, that without those platforms, there's just no way, the buyers and the sellers would be able to come together and make those transactions work. So, and in California in particular, because we're so tech, savvy, it's a leader in these areas. So Californians are consistently interacting with the gig economy in many ways, making more opportunities to earn a living, better products, services, more convenient, all the things that you want in terms of kind of efficiency and growth and better service. That's what we get.
So now that we know what the gig economy is, just how important are gig jobs to California's economy today? And what does your research tell you about how gig work will increasingly become an important part of people's professional lives in the years to come?
I think it's very important. We can throw out dry statistics, that say more than 1/3 of the workforce, has engaged in the gig economy in some way, and that tells you, I think, surprisingly, that lots and lots of people are finding ways to earn income through the gig economy. I think an even larger share of us have purchased things through the gig economy, whether it's finding a handyman to help you in the house, or a painter, or a delivery and transportation, apps, Google, Uber Eats, so I think people are constantly interacting with the gig economy more and more. For me, I think one of the most important benefits, and it's actually ironic because people who usually argue for these benefits are trying to have regulations that would slow down the gig economy, if not make it, shrink it. And that's the right work-life balance. One of the great things about the gig economy that it offers people is that you have a greater ability to control kind of when and where you work and what gigs you take. And so that helps you control your work-life balance. And in particular, when you have families and one parent is going to be primary caregiver, through the gig economy, you can better control when you're working and when you have to, can spend time taking care of your children. And so here's a powerful tool to create that right, work-life balance and help families manage this, very difficult lifestyle of a two working parent household. And that's an amazing kind of benefit. It helps people's, if you're that primary caregiver, your professional life can continue while you're still there for your kids. That's amazing. And remember, this is just one of the benefits. There's all sorts of benefits in terms of entrepreneurship, in terms of helping small businesses compete better. So you have all of these ways that, if we talk about it from an efficiency perspective for the economy, that it's the gig economy helps. When you're taking the work-life balance, there's a tremendous offering to people for years to come.
So when the economic downturn fueled by COVID-19 has, in many ways, out of necessity, increased the number of people working in the gig economy to put food on the table for their families, how has this ongoing pandemic accelerated the transformation of the nature of work?
I would say, I guess, in terms of the acceleration, with new technologies, often it's connecting with it is a very important part of the process. That once people are aware and have interacted with it, that's kind of that, snowballing effect that you have to get that going before the technology can take off and all sorts of things can happen. And so one thing the pandemic has done in so many ways, in so many different technologies, it's that it's forced people to connect with them when they probably wouldn't have had it not been for the lockdowns and all these other areas. So for people who needed the gig economy as a form of a safety net, right? They lost their job, but they went from working in a restaurant to delivering through Uber Eats. They may never have done that had it not been for the pandemic, but now they've actually realized that the gig economy offers a way to earn a living in between jobs, or you fall in hard times. Other professionals could have connected with it and start realizing, hey, I like being an entrepreneur. I like not necessarily working for a company, but being able to develop a portfolio of customers. And this makes it easier. And so not only that, unlike the person who's using it as a safety net and thinking of the gig economy as a short-term kind of place to work, they may be saying, hey, this is a great long-term career prospect, a way to connect with lots of different organizations. And so that just connecting with the gig economy provides that kind of spark that can help it grow to well beyond the 36% of people who have worked for it up to this point.
So an overall theme of your study is that the gig economy represents the future of small businesses in California and across the country, and that policymakers stepping up to the plate and embracing gig work is really the key to expanding entrepreneurship, growing incomes, and reducing poverty. How so?
Well, I think what we just touched upon is one of the relevant issues, right? In terms of if you find yourself in difficult times, laid off, hours cut back, here is a way for you to kind of through side hustle, increase your income. So that type of entrepreneurship is very valuable. But you also have entrepreneurship in a very positive way, where people are able to engage in the gig economy and through that become an entrepreneur, actually possibly hire more people to work with them and grow a business via the gig economy. And so bringing entrepreneurship in and all the benefits that creates more kind of widely, that there's an incredible benefit for that. And there's also an incredible benefit for the more traditional small businesses that may already be in existence, but they have lots of obstacles. And these obstacles keep growing over time when they compete, especially with like the larger companies. And you see all of these costs that taxes or regulations that make it a lot more difficult for a small business to compete. Having access to the right workers, the right skills, being able to afford them. And these are major competitive disadvantages that small businesses, they have to manage every single day. Well, the gig economy, right, now you have access to professionals that can actually help you compete better with the big boys or big girls. And the example I use in the paper is a web presence, right, or a social media presence. And for many organizations, that's imperative. You're going to compete in today's economy. You need to have a strong professional social media presence. Well, for a lot of small businesses, you really can't hire somebody like that full time, where large corporations, they have a Target or Walmart, right? They have top web designers as part of their staff. Well, through the gig economy, right, if you have a very talented web designer who is working through the gig economy, you now have access to them, and you can have them perform the tasks that you need without having to take on all of those costs. And now you have those professional services and access to the talent to help you succeed. It's the same thing with taxes and regulations. There's tons of studies out there. We talked about that in several of the studies on entrepreneurship, where taxes and regulations are a competitive disadvantage for small businesses compared to large business. Well, if I can more efficiently manage my labor force, keep my business and my employees focused on our core function, now I can outsource my non-core function. While doing that, I'm now controlling the tax and regulatory burden of having a larger staff. So I'm now a much more cost-effective organization. I can compete much better. All of that is enabled by a vibrant gig economy. So that promotes entrepreneurship through the small business sector. And that's like the second kind of plank of entrepreneurship beyond the kind of that primary plank of the people working through the gig economy being entrepreneurs themselves.
Wayne, you also argue that the gig economy is already playing and will play an even bigger role in the coming years in encouraging innovation. How will an individual having a gig economy job lead to the next big California idea that blazes trails and shapes an industry?
I think the most important thing about that is experimentations and learning from failures. I mean, one of the most important things that a market economy does, and free markets do, why they work so well, is you have lots of people experimenting and lots of failures and people learning from that. And California has been an economic trailblazer because, Silicon Valley is full of not just the successful, but it's full of ideas that just didn't pan out. But the ability to go and try new things and learn about what works, what doesn't work, what do consumers value, what don't they value. I mean, all of that process and that learning, that's what kind of fosters the ultimate kind of truly groundbreaking ideas. You're going to either remake the industry or, for the really successful, you remake people's daily lives. So the gig economy is creating a platform. It's a very efficient platform where all of these experiments can occur. And the more we empower that, the more kind of we create this fertile environment where, all sorts of crazy ideas can be tested. We're going to end up with that truly trailblazing ideas that we didn't even realize could be done. And all of a sudden, very quickly, it could be just normal day-to-day, of course, why wouldn't you do it that way?
So instead of embracing the gig economy, as you recommend in your study, California lawmakers, not surprisingly, have taken the opposite approach in recent years with the controversial AB 5. So how negative an impact has this law had on the ability of people to find work, especially during the COVID-19 pandemic? And what are some other ways that policymakers in California and other states are picking economic winners and losers in defending these status quo companies and industries?
It's very troubling. And I should start by saying that, Prop 22, which really should have covered all workers. And that's my view of lost opportunity, but it has certainly helped alleviate these costs when you talk about app-based transportation drivers. And just to back up, so, when we're talking about AB5, for those listeners who may not be aware, right? AB5 basically is saying that if you work using a app-based kind of gig economy platform, that you should be considered an employee of those companies, and therefore you're entitled to minimum wage laws, labor regulations, all of these different benefits. And the fact that you don't get them is a sign of exploitation. And this interpretation completely misunderstands what the gig economy is and kind of the services that the gig economy firms are providing. And by the way, this is not simply a mistake that California is making. There was a recent ruling at the Supreme Court in the UK, which was saying that Uber drivers need to be classified as employees. We'll see how that works its way out, but they're making the exact same mistake. And basically, whether it's the AB5 or what they're doing in the UK, is they're using the Trojan horse of workers' rights as a means to kind of create these burdensome regulations. Now, obviously, the first mistake is thinking that these regulations make any sense, but that's a topic for a completely different podcast. Maybe we can talk about that one at a different time. But when you're trying to apply it to the gig economy, the mistake is that you're assuming that, take Uber, which is, I think, the one that most people are probably very familiar with. They're assuming that Uber is a transportation company, or there's this great gig economy platform called Fiverr, where you can hire marketing and web design to provide the services to your firm. And but the problem is Uber is not a transportation company, and Fiverr isn't a marketing or web design firm. And what these firms are is they build platforms. Platforms are places where people can come together. So if we use Fiverr as the example, right, it's a virtual platform where firms who need web design services can then interact with people who want to sell their web design service. It's a marketplace. And if you think about it from the perspective of a marketplace, there's nothing unusual going on, right? Because the value added is that kind of place where people can interact. And if we're going to get really silly, right, it makes no more sense to classify an Uber driver, right, who's using the platform to sell driving services as an employee of Uber as the same way as an Uber customer, right? I mean, they're both using the platform. Why would you say the drivers are an employee but not the customer? They're both using the platform in the same way, abiding by the rules. There's rules that Uber is going to set, and Fiverr does the same thing. All of them are going to set rules because that's part of the services. But ultimately, it's that platform is the service that they're providing. So how does this relate to AB5, right? Because what they're claiming, right, that an Uber driver works for Uber is not true. You have all sorts of excessive costs. You're raising the cost for the buyers, right? So if you had all of these regulations had to apply to services that are being provided, if you want to take an Uber app, all of a sudden you're going to have to spend more. The value for people to use the service is going to go down. But also the idea that you're actually protecting these workers is a farce, because when you look at surveys, 70% of workers, or thereabouts, more than 2/3, say that they're working in the gig economy by choice and that they're satisfied with their arrangements. And I think even with those people who didn't say they were satisfied, is that because they're just not happy that they have to do a side hustle at this point, and they're using it as a safety net, but they still value that they're getting out of it. And so we're making it harder for the gig economy to reach its full potential. We're harming customers, we're increasing costs, and we're going to create less innovation. The benefits for small businesses go down. So there's all sorts of costs because we've misinterpreted exactly what's going on. And if we're going to be cynical, what's happening is that we found a way to lower, through the private sector, to lower costs that the government's imposing that we don't find value to, right? And of course, those people who support those don't like it, so they want to find a way to shut down this very fertile place that is getting around the excessive costs created by government.
With the election of Joe Biden, progressives in Washington are taking the push for gig economy restrictions national. They've introduced legislation in Congress called the PRO Act and are pursuing new regulations through the Biden administration to restrict gig economy work. Additionally, California's chief AB5 enforcer, Julie Su, has been nominated as Deputy Secretary of Labor. What are your thoughts on this push in Washington and the impact it would have on people's freedom to work as they wish?
It's a terrible sign. Regulators, whether it's at the national level and more now at the international level, they don't like the idea of economic competition, right? There's the old, very famous economic paper. They talk about like TIBO model, where people will self-select regions where the government's providing the amount of government services at the cost that they desire. And so when you have the national government taking on California's approach, you're taking away people's ability to say, hey, California, you're taxing too much, you're regulating too much, you're taking away too much economic opportunity. I'm going to go to Texas, or I'm going to go to Utah or Nevada. And we're seeing that right now, this exodus out of California, because the costs have just become too burdensome. Well, if the federal government picks up these bad ideas and starts regulating it national, well, now we lose those opportunities to express the idea that the government is too costly and we need to do it better. So for all the reasons we had just talked about, the more the national government picks up these bad ideas, the less ability we have to say we're going to leave California and go to other states so we can avoid these costs and find the benefit that the gig economy can provide. That'll be thwarted, and through that, what will happen is, if California does it because California is so important, it'll be diminished, but the growth of the gig economy will continue. If it's done nationally, you're really going to start thwarting the benefits, and we're really going to lose out on a lot of not just economic benefits, but if you go back to what we were saying in terms of social benefits. And I think that's the irony, right? The Biden administration would be in favor of better work-life balance, having the primary child caregiver have flexibility to continue working and still take care of the children. I mean, these are things that they constantly talk about. And yet by adopting AB5, they're actually adopting policies that work against those goals.
So Wayne, as a big consumer of Uber and Uber delivery and so on. In fact, I didn't buy a car. I gave my car away, decided not to buy another one because I felt like I didn't no longer needed a car and relied on Uber and Lyft. There are huge efficiencies and cost savings for consumers like myself. Much cheaper rides to the airport, cheaper rides everywhere, not having to buy insurance for a car, all kinds of ways that the gig economy has helped consumers. Could you give us your thoughts on that?
Oh, yeah, absolutely. That's maybe something I haven't emphasized enough. Consumers have tremendous amount of benefit. I love your example of not having to buy a car. And for some people, where driving is not no longer an option, whether it's through an injury or through just you feel like you've gotten too old and don't feel comfortable driving anymore. Through Uber, you can maintain your freedom, right? So there's all sorts of benefits in that way. On top of, well, wait a second, I can better manage my costs. I don't drive that much. I can now spend my money in a different way, which is then obviously going to help other parts of the economy. Maybe I can save more money. So now we have more money for investing and growing capital stock that way. So you have those economic benefits, but also just from a consumer perspective, you're just better off, right? I mean, our standard of living improves when we can purchase goods and services that are kind of better tailored to suit your needs. And also when you have the ability to purchase more things, however you want to define that more, whether it's more of a certain goods or buying different goods, more vacations, whatever your personal preferences are. The gig economy gives people those options and expands those horizons. And so there's a tremendous amount of consumer benefit that the gig economy is offering. And the reason we know that is because these apps are so popular. I mean, if Uber and Lyft weren't so popular, right, then maybe we say that it's not providing much value. But the fact that it's bigger than most taxi companies at this point demonstrates that consumers weren't happy with the current system and that this way of delivering transportation services enhances consumers' welfare. And the more we kind of add regulations, add taxes, the more we shut down the gig economy, we're shutting off those consumer services and we're making people worse off. And that's not how you, A, improve people's lot in life, and B, that's not how you get economic growth.
So finally, as we close, you propose several reforms in your study that you argue would benefit gig economy workers and also remove unnecessary regulatory hurdles that are standing in the way of gig firms from starting up or expanding. So share with our listeners some of your reform ideas.
Well, with some of these, I've suggested in other areas because it's the way we work in the 21st century is changing. And so we have this benefit system that's linked to World War II, and it actually came out of wage and price controls from World War II, and things have just kind of have grown from that. But the 21st century and the way we work and the way we live is so different, and yet benefits of employment benefits are just still anchored to that really bad system. And so that is something that is an obstruction, right? Obviously, healthcare and retirement benefits, other employment benefits, life insurance, things of that nature. Those all right now are tied too much to our employment. And so in order for someone to be an entrepreneur, they're giving up a lot of those benefits. You're going to be in the individual healthcare market, for instance, which is not as efficient as those big employer plans. And so we need to change those systems so that gig economy workers and kind of independent workers overall, writ large, are not disadvantaged with respect to the tax preferences that the employers get. And so that's why we need to expand HSA, health savings HSAs, so that you can use them for whatever healthcare need, and you can put enough away tax-free that you actually are in the same or better position with respect to those accounts. The same thing with savings. We need a way to get more of the savings for retirement from a gig worker into a tax-free account, so they have more financial flexibility. And again, it goes down all the benefits, but we need to create a benefit structure that is more appropriate for a 21st century economy, not what had resulted from wage and price controls of World War II. Then we also need to stop doing these wrong-headed policies. We talked about the PRO Act, that the Biden administration is doing in AB5. The overwhelming support of Prop 22, right? In California, 59% of the voters say, wait a second, this transportation app is too valuable to me, whether as a source of income or as a consumer. I don't want to bury this down underneath of all of these regulations and taxes. And so we need more regulations like that to kind of counter this kind of wrong-headed policies that are going to misclassify gig workers, and is going to impose all sorts of labor regulations that people are telling you, I don't value these regulations. The cost of these regulations are more than what value they create. And so we got to stop trying to impose those on the gig economy. And then lastly, I think what we need to do is the traditional firms, if we can refer to them as that, they do have a point, right? That it's unfair that they have to manage all of these costs, whereas gig economy firms don't. But the answer, of course, is to unleash the potential of those firms. So we need to see the gig economy revolution as a way of finally pushing us towards long overdue regulatory reform, where we get rid of the obstructions like the overburdensome labor regulations or unnecessary occupational licensing requirements. All of these requirements that the traditional firms may have to comply with, zoning regulations, particularly for hotels, get rid of these so that they can actually compete effectively with the gig economy firms without having the albatross of all of these unnecessary regulatory costs. And that would actually then add to the benefits that the gig economy is providing, because now we'd have two different kind of ways of delivering services that can compete with each other, that are going to be much more effective competitors. And when you get that type of situation, it's the consumer and it's economic growth that inevitably benefit.
Thanks so much, Wayne.
Oh, thank you.
If you like this episode, please tell your friends and subscribe to PRI's podcast at iTunes, Google Play, Stitcher, TuneIn, iHeartRadio, and Spotify. And when you're on these platforms, don't forget to give us a big 5 stars. If you don't subscribe to any of these, you can still listen on PRI's YouTube page, youtube.com/Pacific Research 1. That's the number 1. Thanks for listening. I'm Rowena Ichon. Hope you'll come back again for next round with PRI.